Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Welcome back to our vegetable garden in Spokane, Washington. Our hardiness zone ranges from 5B to 6A. Would you believe it has been a month since I showed you how our vegetable garden is doing? And boy, have we had a lot of challenging weather since then. So I've got some plants that are struggling mightily and other ones that are doing fantastically. So you're going to see everything today, and we need to get started. Let's start out with the pea patch. We're growing green arrow peas, which are a shelling pea, and you know, they really got off to a rough start for a change this year. I don't know if it was the weather or what, but then about 2 weeks ago, they kicked it into high gear, put on a lot of growth, and we have been picking peas every other day. You know, you cannot beat the taste of fresh peas from your garden, right? So I'm very happy with how they're doing now. And we do have some temperatures in the 90s coming up this week. So that might be the end of them, but we have a plan to grow corn in this bed once they're finished. Next up is the lettuce bed, and you can see I've got some shade cloth on it. I've been trying to keep the plants a little bit cooler if I can, so that they'll last as long as possible. But again, with the warmer weather, that might be the end of the lettuce as well, because it's definitely a cool season crop. Let's take a look. The lettuce variety is Bauer, and I am so sold on it. This is my second year of growing it, and it is incredibly productive. I have been picking this like crazy, and it still is cranking out the leaves, so it is amazing. Now for this bed, we are also planning on growing a succession crop of corn here once the lettuce is finished. In this next bed, I'm growing Swiss chard and beets, and the reason it has netting over it is because beets, spinach, and Swiss chard, which are all members of the beet family, are very susceptible to leaf miners, which will ruin the leaves in nothing flat. Let's take a look at the plants. In this front row, I'm growing Swiss chard. And even though I don't have any leaf miner issues, do you see this jagged edge here? That is a classic sign of slug damage. And they're probably in the soil, so there was nothing I could do to keep them out of the bed compared to what I do to keep the leaf miners away. So yeah, I've got some weeding to do, put a little slug bait down, and hopefully we can resolve this problem before it gets any worse. It's kind of hard to show you the beets in this bed because they're hidden a little bit, but they are growing in 2 rows behind the Swiss chard. The plants are doing really well, and I can see small beets forming already, so I'm looking forward to harvesting them when the time comes. I have been so excited to show you the broccoli bed because it is doing so well. This is my second year of growing Bell Star broccoli, and I heartily recommend it because it is so productive. Now you can see I'm growing it under some agricultural insect netting, and that's to keep the aphids and cabbage moths or butterflies away so I don't get cabbage worms inside. And this has worked great. So let's look at the plants. There are 8 plants in this bed, and each of them has developed a huge head. So this is the primary head, and once I remove it, it will start forming secondary heads along the sides. So the total harvest that you get from these plants is really amazing. How do you know when to pick them? They should be a uniform green color and very tight. You don't want these to be loose and starting to bloom, because right now they're at their best. So I'm going to pick one of these heads. Wow. Well, what do you think? That is impressive, isn't it? So broccoli plants are really quite easy to grow. The big thing is insect control. And I would much rather use something like the floating row cover or agricultural insect netting and create a barrier to keep the insects out than using an organic product. And I only do organic. But using row covers is the way to go, especially with cabbage family crops such as broccoli. Next up is a small bed of corn. The variety is Sweetness Bicolor. We had extra seedlings and an empty bed, so this is where we're growing part of our corn crop. And looky here, it's an empty bed. You don't see that often in our garden. But Bill just harvested the pak choi, radishes, and turnips. And that's because they do not tolerate hotter weather. They bolt to seed, and that means the plant's basically done. We will plant a later crop of them to enjoy through the fall months. But for now, we've got this empty bed, and Bill is intending to plant some bush beans. This is our crazy kale bed. So this is red Russian. I started the seeds using the winter sowing method. The plants have been growing great. I've been harvesting tons of leaves, and they keep putting out tons more of the leaves. So this is something that is a nice addition to a salad. And so I'm making salads with the kale and the Bauer lettuce, plus some other things thrown in. But it's doing really well. I'm using floating row covers to keep away cabbage moths or butterflies because they are the culprits for cabbage worms. This is our famous bean arbor, and I wanted to show you the whole thing before I zero in on some of the plants. We're growing Vortex, which is a fantastic variety that tolerates our summertime heat, so that's important. So let me show you how they're doing. This plant is winning the race to get to the top so far. They are really climbing up now and are really getting into that growth mode. So here are a couple of plants growing up this part of the trellis, and there are flowers, so that means beans are on the way. It's funny how the plants will look so sparse this time of year, and then all of a sudden, whammo, lots of flowers, lots of leaves, and soon, actual beans. This is the first of my tomato beds, and in this one, I'm growing Supremo. Those are a paste tomato, so that means they're great for making things like sauces, salsas, and ketchup. And they are a determinate tomato. That means that they will grow to a smaller height than indeterminate tomatoes do, and they tend to produce all of their fruits at about the same time, which works really well for canning projects. Now let me tell you what's been going on with them. At this point in the season, these plants should probably be about this tall, blooming and setting fruits. But up until about a week ago, the plants were this tall. They were just pathetic. I came out to the garden one day, and what did I see? A couple of tomato blossoms and a couple of small fruits developing. And I looked at that plant and I thought, there is no way you can support that type of growth. So I did something I have never had to do in all the years I've grown tomatoes. I pinched off the flowers and the fruits. Ugh. But I just felt it was the right thing to do. Now, in the past week, we've had a lot nicer weather. These plants have shot up, which is great. I even see a few flowers on this one and the one next to it. I'm going to leave them because I think they're back on track. I am hoping for a great harvest like I got from Supremo last year, and we shall see. I'll keep you posted. In my second bed of tomatoes, I'm growing a new to me variety called Blue Beach. It was recommended to me by a friend who really knows his stuff, and he said that this variety is very resistant to blossom end rot, and so I thought it was worth a try. And as you can see, the plants are growing a lot better than their neighbors. And they've got some flowers and so on. Now you can see I'm growing the tomatoes up a grid, and it looks like it's time for them to have their first tying into that structure with some jute twine. So that's on my list of things to do today. Next up is our squash arbor. It's going up and over a pathway in the garden, and on either side of it I'm growing two types of winter squash. One is a new type of kabocha squash, and the other is autumn frost, which I've grown for years, and it is amazing. The thing is that they just now are hitting their stride, although there are a couple of plants that are looking kind of pathetic. Again, I'm blaming things on the weather because the weather has definitely been the unusual factor for this growing season. But I do hope everything is back to normal. Here's one half of the arbor plants, and they're looking pretty good. I can see that they're starting to vine. At the end of this row, Bill is growing some different types of grape tomatoes in pots. You can see they really are hitting their stride now, and there's a lot of flowers on the plants, even a couple of baby tomatoes. And speaking of growing vegetables in containers, this is where we're growing our potatoes in cloth grow bags. The bags are the 15-gallon size, and this method has worked really well for us, and it's way easier to harvest them this way. We're growing carrots and parsnips in the bed right next door to the potatoes, and I have noticed that some of the leaves of the carrots are turning red. I'm not 100% sure what that means. Is it a type of rust? Is it a reaction to our crazy weather patterns? I don't know. So I need to check into that more. This is our garlic patch. We harvested the garlic scapes recently, and those are only found on hardneck garlic varieties. What it is the plant wanting to bloom. You don't want that to happen because it takes energy away from the bulb that's developing down in the soil. So we wait until they form a curlicue and then snip them off, and we eat them because they're delicious. But how do you know when to harvest garlic? Usually what you'd want to do is to wait until the bottom 3 or 4 leaves have completely turned brown. Then you can dig them up very carefully and then put them somewhere out of the light to dry. This is our melon bed. In it, I'm growing cantaloupes and watermelons. In the foreground, you can see 4 lush plants, one of which is a marigold, but the other 3 are the cantaloupes. They're blooming, they're vining, and doing everything that you would want cantaloupes to do. Now let's take a close look at the watermelons. Are they pathetic or what? So this one is the most pathetic. This one looks better, and this one looks pretty sad. So Bill has a theory that they just need more warmth than what this season has given them. Last year I grew them in our hoop house. It was plenty warm in there, but the one thing that happened to them was blossom end rot. So I thought, okay, it'll be a much smarter idea next year, so this year, to grow them out in the garden. But little did I know we'd have such a cold spring. When this plant started wilting about 8 to 10 days ago, I thought, uh-oh, what's going on? Is the soil not moist enough? But I tested it, it's fine. And then I thought, well, is something maybe nibbling on it in the soil right at the base of the stem? So I want to investigate that today because I don't think this plant is going to make it. The stem looks fairly normal. I don't see any suspicious insects in there. So if you have a problem come up in your garden, this is the type of thing you want to do. You want to do a little bit of investigating. So you look closely at the plant. Do you see any kind of insects on it? Is there any kind of damage to the plant? How about the soil? Is it lightly moist? That's always the goal. You don't want it to be bone dry or sopping wet. And if you have more than one plant that is of the same type, look at them and see how they're doing. So in this case, I have to admit it, I think Bill is right because all 3 watermelon plants are struggling. And we have had an incredibly challenging growing season so far. Now I did plant a couple of extra watermelon seeds, but I don't know, it's probably too late. But I thought I would at least give it a try. This has been quite the garden season, and every now and then it's a bit humbling when these types of things come up. Now, I don't want to sound envious or anything because I'm going to benefit from this harvest, but Bill's tomato plants are bigger than mine. That is not fair. So he is growing different types of grape tomatoes in here. I'll put the variety names on the screen for you. And the plants are doing really well, although his struggled a bit early on too, so it's just that darned weather. In this bed, Bill is growing a whole bunch of onions, some leftover pepper plants, which are struggling in this weather, and also a parsley plant that you can see at the far end. Now it's time for a quick peek inside our little hoop house. Now this is a structure that Bill designed. We built it way back in 2014 and we use it year round. In the winter time, we can grow super cold hardy plants without any supplemental heating, and then it gives us a harvest during the off season. So that's very cool. And then during the summer months, we grow warm season crops. Bill really loves growing peppers, and so he's got both sweet peppers and hot peppers growing in here. You can see the plants are doing pretty well, and some of them are already fruiting. Now let's look at the 4 raised beds on the south side of our garden, plus the bed behind our greenhouse. Just in case you haven't noticed, Bill and I really like onions and shallots, and that's what he's growing in this bed. Everything was started from seed, and they got off to a rough start. Now they're doing better. In this bed, I'm growing a variety of things here. This is spooky pumpkin. I'm growing some zinnias to attract pollinators, also for cut flowers, and I recently pinched them back so they would bush out more, and you can see that's happening. In the rest of the bed, I've got Big Mac's pumpkins, this plant and this one, and I have to say in my defense that when I was starting seeds, of course, I had no idea of the type of weather we were going to have this season. So I don't know what I'm going to get, and you'll get to see what happens. And then these 2 plants are ground cherries. We thought those would be fun to grow. And then I have some different types of sunflowers at the back. In this bed, I also have a few things going on. So more zinnias, also pinched back recently, so that's good. And then these 2 plants are Cocozelle zucchini squash. They are fabulous. I even see a brand new little baby here. They're blooming. Again, they're getting off to a slow start. In the rest of the bed, I have 4 Burpees butterbush butternut squash. We grew those last year. They're amazing. It's a shorter season butternut squash variety that does not take up so much room in the garden. The plants look like they are just starting to perk up. My gosh. And then behind them, I've got sunflower plants. Now, if you're thinking, boy, I thought she was a good weeder, this bed has been a real problem. First of all, there's this type of a moss that's growing in here that I cannot keep up with, and then these guys keep popping up. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to weed the whole bed again, and then I can finally put down a mulch of some grass clippings, and that should make it very hard for them to grow. Sheesh. In the 4th raised bed, I'm growing fava beans, and these ones, even though they look robust, do not seem like they're doing very well. Again, we're pretty sure because of the weather, but I'll show you what fava beans look like. This is what fava bean pods look like, and when I can tell that the seeds have really filled each pod, that's when I'll be picking them. And the method, which is a little labor intensive, is that you will take out the seeds, boil them in water, and then pinch out the part that you can eat. Yeah, that's a lot of work, but we thought, gee, that would be fun. Now the reason I'm saying that these are struggling is, in theory, there should be pods all the way up these stems, and they're just more towards the bottom, and we think that they're just not liking the weather we've had. Here's the bed behind the greenhouse, and you might recall that a few weeks ago I shot a video called How to Grow Corn. You can find it on my YouTube channel. And during it, I planted little corn seedlings. Now they struggled for a while, again, because of the weather. I'm sorry I'm harping on this. And now look at them. They are really hitting their stride, and the variety is Sweetness Bicolor. It's our all-time favorite corn variety, and I'm very excited about this. As I mentioned earlier, we're doing a succession planting after the peas are finished, and we're also going to do one after the lettuce is finished. So yeah, we really like corn. Now, my garden tour would not be complete without an update on how my 2 GreenStalk vertical planters are doing. And the short answer is, holy cow, they're doing great. They're doing better than the garden. So I'm not sure what's up with that. Maybe it's because they're in a little bit more protected area on the back side of our house. The pots may be a little bit warmer, so it helped them get through the cold nights. I don't know. But they are doing beautifully. So let me give you a closer look. So in this top tier is a type of zinnia. The goal was to attract pollinators to this area of the garden. And I can see a little ladybug on here. How cool is that? The next row down is orange hat dwarf tomato, and they are absolutely covered with little tomatoes. So I'm very excited about that. In this row, I'm growing a sweet pepper called Pizza My Heart, and right down below it is Fantastico tomatoes. In this bottom tier, I'm growing epic hybrid eggplants. We did this last year and they grew beautifully. In the second GreenStalk, I have a different type of zinnia at the top, again for pollinators. And then this pepper is called Pretty and Sweet. The next tier down, I'm growing two different varieties of cucumbers, and they are just starting to grow better. This is a jalapeno pepper called Patapeño, and in the bottom tier, I'm also growing more epic hybrid eggplants. Well, that's the end of the tour. I hope you enjoyed it and that your garden is growing much better than ours has been. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. Remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that like button. Happy gardening!